After God knows how many years at this point, we finally have a 1/100 scale plastic model kit of the Kshatriya. But does it live up to the hype? Was it worth the wait? Yes. Sorry to spoil the review, but yes. Abso-tivolutely. In fact, it's above and beyond. I didn't say anything about it being like an MG there because it's not. In Bandai terms, this is much more like a 1/100 scale perfect grade, basically. So let's see why this is the best kit in a long time, and see just how good it is. First of all, let's start with the detail. The inner frame is crazy. You build it in its entirety before putting any armour on, and it's filled with so many details and parts separation. A lot is obvious, but there's even more besides. The silver, for example, actually has 2 different tones. There are multiple shades of grey, used for the core frame, white piping, red piping, even in more hidden places designed to be exposed when certain parts open up so that you have something to look at and actually feel like you're uncovering something. The only nitpick I could make is with the amount of yellow piping. With how prominent it is and how much it pops just due to being yellow, it would have been nice if there were 2 tones of that as well. My least favourite part of the frame is because of this. Here at the top of the binders, you add these yellow pieces on top, but the design of them clearly looks like it should be colour separated itself. Honestly, I feel bad even nitpicking it and bringing it up, but it's only because the kit is so good and there are other similar details that are separated. Like on the other side of the binders, there's white piping beautifully separated in several places, with grey going on top of the middle and then yellow at the top and everything. It makes sense. Those pipes are visible all the time, while the simpler yellow ones can only be seen when the hatch is open once the armour's put on, but they've gone to such efforts with the inner frame already, enough that it genuinely might even be the best way to display it, and certainly adds a lot of security and value should Bandai ever make one, that it being covered by armour doesn't feel as important as usual. I mean, even this black detail next to it is a separate piece, only just for some great extra detail. There are gold runners and pieces too that perhaps could have been used to separate the yellow more. But that's the last I'll say about it, because it genuinely is nitpicking. The gold also has 2 tones and works very well and really helps the thrusters stand out, but it maybe is used a bit sparingly, especially the second darker tone of gold, only really being in the binders in noticeable amounts. The whole thing is also filled with just extra moving parts and opening hatches, enough that I'm not going to take like 10 minutes of your time listing them all, and instead just use them as B-roll throughout the video, which also works for me because it takes the pressure off of me having to find different poses that will actually fit in my small, bad filming space to use as B-roll, when the Kshatriya doesn't even really make that easy with its lack of handheld weapons and everything. Don't get me wrong, the kit is plenty poseable, it's just the Kshatriya's arms are pretty vestigial. When it is all armoured, the hatches are a bit less noticeable when open, unfortunately, and the detail is a bit less striking. It has several tones to the green, but they're used quite sparingly and some are very subtle. It felt too subtle and normal to me after everything going on with the inner frame, but it does mean a more anime accurate look, and there's a lot of panel lines and decals if you want to zhuzh it up, as well as plenty separated parts so that you could paint more variations in tone if you want. It is probably actually the best way to do it. Out of box, keep it more anime accurate while still detailed, but don't risk overdoing the detail while still leaving plenty of options to add the detail that you want. All the armour and lots of the inner frame are all undergated where there'd be a visible nub too, but there are still quite a few visible nubs on the armour of mine from the edge stress marking, I think. I'm not sure if that's my error and if they'll clean up with some work, which I haven't done at all. I've just purely used the nippers on this so far, but it does seem a bit unfortunate and strange with all of the undergating. I also haven't used any of the stickers either, and yes, don't panic, it does have stickers, but they are purely for optional small bits of colour separation. For little bits of indented circular detail that you can colour separate with stickers if you want. It helps that it also comes with a great sturdy stand. Honestly, as someone who has the Steel Legend metal build, the stand is one of the best things about this, to be honest. Without one, I've been able to do basically nothing with the Steel Legend. The stand also just has a lot of effort put into it with added details, walkways, and even an articulated arm for pilots to reach the cockpit. The little light piece that it has is a bit annoying though, with the separate swivelling light really liking to just pop off. You can also store the magnet used for the binder LEDs here on the stand, but it isn't great either. The magnet doesn't go into the plastic holder with any kind of a tight fit, so it will fall out quite easily. It needs glued, really. There's a little drawer that pulls out for storing stuff though, even though it being the Kshatriya, it doesn't have a lot of accessories, they've still given you someplace to store what it does have. So you could put the light or the magnet in here if you need to. It is a little bit annoying though, because it's just a little bit too short to fit the alternate hands in without removing their fingers, but there's still plenty of space for the hands with the fingers separated to go into the drawer, so not the end of the world, just slightly annoying to have to separate them, and again, really a nitpick. The stand is nice and sturdy, as you'd expect with all of the joints having locks. That does have the same downside as always, where sometimes it won't lock in the position where you really want it to, but it seems to have been well thought out maybe, because I haven't really had that issue at all yet. It has those locking joints for the binders too, but the overall stability of the kit still isn't perfect. The waist joint can bend from the weight of the binders, and the weak link is definitely the shoulders themselves. When I posed it with the front binders up, it really made it very back heavy, and the shoulders just kept completely falling back. I definitely couldn't have made that my pose for it and put it on my shelf or anything without making some extra support to hold the binders up at the back. They do have a locking mechanism too, but it just doesn't seem to do much. The design of it just doesn't allow enough contact between the plastics or anything to really do much to help hold all of this weight. But the shoulders themselves do go onto their peg really tightly and sturdily, so it's not at all bad. It's only in extremely unbalanced poses like the one I tried that it can become a problem. Given the quality and solidity of the rest of the kit, I may also have just not used the locking mechanism properly. Those funnel effect parts it comes with are great, and it's fantastic that it comes with them, but they're not without issue too. For starters, I was very surprised that there wasn't actually enough of them for every funnel. There's only half as many as you'd need to display every funnel in use. That's okay, because you could still have all 4 binders deploying funnels, just with some not quite in flight yet. But it's still notable and was surprising. And if you do display them like that, then you kind of do still want some effects for that. For example, some very short clear pipes, say, to show them just leaving the binders, or just more blast effects, as well as the ability to use them to display the funnels just blasting off from the binders, without having to use any clear pipes like you currently do. The funnels also attach on quite tightly so that it's difficult to use the effects or attach the funnels back afterward, but it does stop the effect parts twisting or falling or anything, which can be a common issue with this kind of thing usually. The clear blue parts that are the core of the funnels can look a bit odd and long without the effect parts too, when they're just supposed to be at rest, inactive in the binders. And it, along with how hard it is to push the funnels in all of the way, can make them catch the binder when you try to open them up. The effect parts, when attached, obviously stop you being able to open up the binders if they weren't already too. The LEDs also don't look great with the effects, but I don't really see what else they could have possibly done to really make them look better. It's just a long way for the light to travel, so the funnels at the end just aren't that bright. And worse, the blast effects at the end get virtually no light, which really becomes noticeable in contrast to the ones at the binders that are maybe too bright, considering it's kind of hard to explain why they're actually there once you think about it. If the funnel was still there, still blasting off, it would make sense, but as it is, with them having their own blasts quite far away from the binders, it's ever so slightly strange. Those blast effects at the binders are required to attach the clear pipes to, which is, I think, the flaw. It would be nice if it was designed so that they were optional, and then that would also help solve the issue of not having enough of them by allowing you to use the spares of only them to show some just starting to blast off. Simple, two birds with one stone. But I'm still kind of nitpicking because there will always be downsides, and it's great that they are so secure and you don't have to worry about them twisting or anything. The LEDs in general are great. The binders have two modes depending how far out you open them. Solid light but also breathing when fully expanded. There's a good amount of leeway once you get it on the setting you want to be able to move it without it changing or turning off again too. Like, you can open them, get the light on, and then basically very nearly close them again and the light will stay on, which is fantastic. The body LEDs also have a simple, very easy to use switch that just requires you to push the head forward, and the mono eye lights up and the chest lights even spin. Those chest lights might be a bit too bright, if anything, being brighter than any of the other LEDs, but I think that's a pretty good complaint to have, even if they do kind of drown out the mono eye. I'm not sure why they spin though, when they're supposed to be mega beam cannons and not reactors or something, and the binder ones don't look the same at all, but it's easy enough to explain as them being different strengths of beam cannon or something. Then the cockpit also lights up completely separately. So if you turn on the head and chest, you don't have to waste the battery or worry about light leak from the cockpit, and if you open up the cockpit you don't have to have all of the other lights on and can let it look relatively powered down while still being able to see all of the detail. The downside though is you can't really display it with the cockpit open without draining or removing the batteries. It might actually have been better to just give the switch under the head a few different settings that you could toggle through with different combinations. That could also allow you to turn on the mono eye by itself, even if it would be much less impressive than how it currently works. The cockpit hatch is also just fantastic though. The armour above is connected so that it raises as you open the hatch, and as you do, the red cockpit itself pulls out to become more accessible. You then raise the hatch on that, allowing you to see in, but it doesn't even stop there. The seat itself and all its detail with the monitor and everything also pulls out further. It even has a little overhang that you could probably stand a scale pilot figure on if you wanted to. I also discovered when I took the pilot figure out of the cockpit to paint it after making pretty much the entire rest of the video, that panel in front of the seated pilot figure in the cockpit, the way it attaches in means that you can effectively move it about in the cockpit and pose it and have it fold down. Cool as hell! Effectively adds even more detail and painting opportunities, because now you can justify painting the inside screen of it, or printing decals or anything. Could be cool. And also just looks cool that it moves out of her way to get in and out. Great. Also, while I'm here from the future, even though it's a complete non sequitur, it makes it a lot easier for me editing wise to just say it here, I noticed that the LEDs for the binders make a slight noise, just a slight high-pitched whine. There's no way I'll be able to catch it on camera, it's ever so slight, it's only because I was using them in silence that I noticed, but I noticed, and it's odd. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming. This is the kind of high-quality cockpit I talked about in the Vidar review that makes them much easier to care about and enjoy, and it was done by a third party and not Bandai. One of the best cockpits ever designed, probably, honestly. The chest LED instructions are probably the worst part though. I've seen posts from a lot of people having made mistakes there, and I did too. I actually did exactly what it said, but there was too much spare wire coming out, so I couldn't actually get the parts to close. I had to take it all apart again and ignore the instructions to double back the wire to try and get less in the way, and it was still tight after. I will say though, it is very sturdy. I fully expected to have broken the one I was having issues with from all the pressures of trying to get it together and apart again, especially with it being the cable that was in the way and getting placed under all that stress, but no, still works perfectly, thankfully. The binder LEDs were much easier and more straightforward, thankfully, but the instructions do make a point of showing that the switch is set to off, while saying nothing more, which can be very confusing because it's off. So you wonder if it's telling you to change it and make sure that it's actually on, but no, it does actually need to be set to off to function properly with the opening binders and the breathing setting. I've seen a lot of people have issues because of this too, some even having tried to rewire it to fix it without realising. I honestly wasn't too worried when I thought I had broken mine though, because I viewed the LEDs as just a bonus extra that it's surprising and incredible that it even comes with. Because compared to Bandai, it doesn't feel like they added really anything at all to the price of the kit, with this whole kit only costing $100 before shipping. With, it was a little over $200 though, but it's not like Bandai that has you pay pretty much the entire cost of this kit before shipping, just for an LED set simpler than this one. The build itself is good and about Bandai quality. There are some tight parts that will hurt your fingers a little bit, but the Vidar had that too even, and this, on the other hand, kind of needs to be tight to make sure it's properly sturdy. It's still not really an ideal kit for beginners. Some steps in the instructions are really quite hard to see, like step 116 for example, and it having so many parts, like a perfect grade, and having LEDs, makes it a more complex build as these things go, but they're all snap-fit kits. If you want to build it, you certainly can. I'd suggest keeping one of the bags that the runners come in and using it for loose parts though. Mine had a fair amount of parts that had come off of their runner at some point and were just sitting loose in the bag, so it's good to have somewhere to keep them, as well as being able to finish runners quicker. The kit doesn't really have you finish very many until the entire body frame is about done, and occasionally you can finish one quicker if you just cut the last few pieces off and keep them in a bag like that for later. I did that with the P runner for example. I'll also say the torso lists the U runner as one of the ones you'll need, but you do only need one piece from it. So after you get that piece for the cockpit, you can just put it back in storage until you do the armour. It doesn't really actually affect the build process though, because you're pretty much using all of the same runners for the entire frame, making it easier to manage them all without finishing some very often. It also helps a lot how it's packaged. The kit comes with 3 separate boxes, a small one for the LED components, a large for the majority of runners, and then a smaller, more medium-sized box that you can use to build out of and store the runners that you're actually using. It makes for actually a really straightforward and easy to manage build despite how large and full of runners it is. It has you start with the legs, which is a bit unusual but is actually really nice because it then builds up from there really logically and naturally. It also allows it to really impress and make a strong first impression by starting with what is always the most complex subassembly. The sides of the knees were a bit tricky though. I'd recommend doing like half of the second step first, putting the pieces together only part way, and then put pieces from the first step into the grooves before completely pushing the pieces together like the second step shows. And at the waist, for step 5.3, I had an issue and spent a while trying to figure out what was wrong because without realising, I didn't get the top part of the waist all the way onto the peg properly. I only realised when I couldn't get the front piece of the waist on. So just be careful that it can be difficult to get that piece fully on the peg, and it's easy to miss if you haven't. The front skirts attachment also seems a little flawed because the piece you attach them onto can move in and out, but it's so tight with not a lot of space that once you push it in, like you probably will when putting these skirts on, it's very hard to get them out again without the skirts popping off or having to use a tool to properly get in there and push them out again. Now you know about it, it shouldn't be an issue. Just pull them out so that you can hold them in place as you put the skirts on, and it should never really be a problem. Then, lastly, the dark gold fins that go into the binders are awkward to put in because they have to go around the exact right way, which is a little hard to see on the instructions, and because it doesn't actually want you to put them in all the way. You have to leave a gap between them and the piece you're putting them into. Once you figure it out, it's not as hard as it sounds. It doesn't actually really seem to matter how deeply you put them in, but it is a strange part to build. After doing the whole frame, it's time for the armour, which I've noticed can be a bit of a slog on other kits when separated completely from the inner frame build like this. But here, it's kept more interesting with the opening hatches. You're still adding some new mechanics and opening parts while doing the armour, so there's still a bit of a sense of discovery as you go. There are annoyances though, the chest being the worst. Putting the armour on it is a bit of a pain in the arse, with it requiring you to squeeze lots of bits of armour in between finished parts of the frame and everything. Some other parts had armour panels that took a fair amount of force to fully go into position as well, but the ones on the binders, for example, were actually more enjoyable because of it. Because they do take some cajoling and effort, but then they'd go in with a nice big satisfying pop. And I realised after that I honestly just enjoyed it more because of that. The sleeves are completely separated, but they also aren't very great. The black parts that go into the white are a bit warped and don't want to sit entirely flush against the white part underneath. On the chest, they even quite want to pop out entirely. There's a few potential fixes though. You could try gluing them, heat them to see if it hopefully puts them back into their original shape, or heat them while attached to the white part and try and bend and warp them into sitting flush. Overall, the build is fantastic. I haven't built the PG Unleashed, it's probably the most important kit I haven't built, but that is the only Bandai kit that seems possibly comparable to this. That's what I mean about this being more like a perfect grade. The only real dodgy part of the build was the LED installation, but they function amazingly in the finished kit, with even easy access to change the batteries. And they're sturdy enough to stand up to most abuse and mistakes during the build anyway. And even if you do break them, they seem to have added so little to the price you pay that they might as well have been free. The kit itself was only $100, which is absolute insane value. Of course, the shipping did slightly more than double it, but even at that price of a little over $200, this is still a perfect grade tier kit. The only perfect grades you can get for that price are older ones that, while great, are actually still much simpler than this. Because of that, the only kits that can really compete with what this offers are the PG Unleashed and most likely the upcoming perfect grade Nu Gundam. And that Nu Gundam is really this kit's biggest competition, I feel. But on paper at least, I can't see how it could beat this. They're both absolute fan favourite, top tier anticipated mobile suits. But without the Nu Gundam actually being released yet, it's hard to imagine how it could possibly be a big enough improvement over this to demand more than twice the price before shipping. And with shipping, probably more like closer to triple. With the LED kit then being a separate purchase on top and costing as much as this entire kit pre-shipping. It will be smoother than this, I'm sure, with the full Bandon't I polish, but on top of the price, this kit's inner frame is just fantastic enough to add a genuinely huge amount to the kit's value proposition. If you do break the LEDs, it actually doesn't feel like any kind of waste to me to buy the entire kit again for a replacement, because you can just have one armoured and one with the frame exposed. Even more than that though, Bandon't I might still make their own Kshatriya at some point, especially with the MGEX line existing. If it does still exist, but that's a whole other matter. They've just announced a new RE100 after fuck knows how long after all. The gorgeous frame though means that you don't actually have to worry about that. If they do release one and you want to give it a spin and see what it's like, you still can. Just take the armour off of this one and you have two totally different display pieces. I personally think I actually am going to be displaying it with the armour off as the inner frame, because it just looks incredible. At least until I get around to practicing and painting the armour of this in the 2D cel shaded style that I want to do it in. I also had it with only one binder on each side for a little while, and I could see this easily making for a cool Quin Mantha custom too. The only real downside in the end, like I said earlier, is the relative lack of accessories and posing options. But that's not at all this kit's fault though. They've given us a hanger diorama-like stand, lots of effect parts, the typical beam sabers, and even a little unusually for a third-party kit, we still get pilot figures to make use of those stand and cockpit features. It is just the design of the Kshatriya where it not only doesn't have any handheld weaponry, it doesn't suit them. I launched into a whole massive tangent here about the fantastic design of the Kshatriya itself, but in the end I went on for so long that I think I should actually just make it its own proper video. So look forward to that, I guess. This kit just reminded me I fucking love the Kshatriya, man. Any other year this would be instant guaranteed kit of the year. Unfortunately, it just so happens to have released in probably the only year this decade with a new perfect grade release coming right at the end. But like I went through earlier, I really don't see how that could actually outdo this. Unless you ignore price and value at least. And if a perfect grade Nu Gundam can't confidently beat it, what else possibly can? Unless the Nu Gundam really does find a way to destroy this, I don't actually think it's hyperbolic to call this kit of the decade. What else is going to release that is going to outdo this? I can't wait to find out! Thank you so much for watching. I have other videos you could check out, like I mentioned the MG Vidar a couple of times, and I reviewed that fully detailed and painted in case you want to check that out. And like I said, I think I have a video on the design of the Kshatriya I'm going to make soon too, after this kit just reminded me and made me realise just how great it is. So, either way, until hopefully next time, bye.